Might as well. Well, we're doing this again because I feel like we need to end the year off with a little bit of gravitas and not just say, hey, 2020 sure was a dumpster fire of a year, but those video games, they just kept coming, which is true. But you don't need to tell me how the year went. Maybe you need me to tell you all about the incredible video games. I mean, you must be here for a reason. Is it to see the suit again? Unpacking a year like 2020 for quality video games is hardly a walk in the park. Not an impossible task by any means, since the world may stop turning, but video games sure don't. But it's often hard to see through the fog of uncertainty and inevitable delays caused by overwhelming outside forces. This is a year that needed video games more than most, and while I don't think it's been as spectacular as previous years, that's not to say we were completely starved of quality and forced to do something drastic like read a book or go outside. Oh god, we definitely can't do that! Perhaps it's even more impressive then that in spite of all the disruptions, we did get so many great games and such a lofty level of variety as well that was able to connect people across such an isolated world. I'd say before the holidays kick into high gear, it might be worth looking back on the best games of the year as a way of giving some buying advice if you're stuck what to get the video game fanatic in your life, or if you need to catch up on all this good stuff yourself. Trust me when I say that there's more than you might think. You just gotta pay attention. It's no great metric for overall quality, but surprise stealth drop of the year definitely goes to Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. It was a casual weekday, and I was at my desk pretending to work when Nintendo posted a tweet out of nowhere about this new Hyrule Warriors game that acts as a prequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, where you can play through the events of the Great Calamity and watch all your favourite characters die one at a time. And holy shit guys, can you just warn me first, please? For a company that prefers to do its business from within the confines of a Nintendo Direct, I kinda like being surprised like this. It's a nice change of pace from everyone on Twitter spamming every one of Nintendo's tweets with crap about the next Direct. We don't need them if they're happy to stealthily announce titles as interesting as Age of Calamity, something I can just sit back and veg on since I know how it's gonna end. Just enjoy the combat and inevitable deaths. Or maybe something crazier! So mainline Warriors games catch a bit of flack for being a franchise on autopilot at times that refuses to do anything original, so you can imagine my surprise when Age of Calamity started to put into motion a story of time travel and changing the future in such a way where everyone doesn't have to die, and instead you can enjoy these characters for as long as you like. It's already remarkable that Breath of the Wild is due to become a trilogy of sorts, but now Age of Calamity is able to tell its own story with a separate but equally enjoyable combat system, albeit for completely different reasons. I found myself playing a lot of this game recently and may well go as deep as I did with the original Hyrule Warriors for optional content, and all of that is frankly insane considering my initial perspective on Age of Calamity. If Nintendo can shatter expectations with the spin-off prequel thing, imagine what the sequel will look like. I'll take anything at this point. I feel like the general public is more interested in tricky video games than ever before. I don't know if that's the content creator angle, where it's a lot of fun to tune into someone you know fail over and over again at difficult video games, so you buy into that to hopefully beat that game and feel like a better gamer person in of yourself, but we are seeing a really good resurgence of tricky video games right now. And it's not just to get your money's worth. Not gonna lie, it feels very strange praising Crash Bandicoot 4 It's About Time a couple of weeks after criticising its approach to optional content and how 100% completion isn't very rewarding to do. But at the same time, I feel like I should give credit where credit's due since the main game is some of the best Crash Bandicoot we've ever gotten. In just a few years, we've gone from hearing nothing from this franchise to getting a remake of the original trilogy, and now a new kind of fourth Crash game that pulls in ideas from a host of different sources to give the world a very satisfying, challenging platformer. Any fans of long-forgotten franchises can point to Crash Bandicoot in hope that their franchise gets similar treatment in the future. Crazier things have happened. As the first original Crash Bandicoot since the franchise's renaissance, this was a golden opportunity for developers Toys for Bob, working on a new Crash game for the first time, having overseen the porting of the Insane trilogy to the Switch, to stamp their mark and influence all over this franchise with fresh ideas and just so much content. I know that's a contentious issue as far as 100% completion goes, but if you're looking for a Crash game, or really any game that's going to keep you occupied with shit to do, then this is one of the best games of the year for that alone. Never mind the new playable characters and the revamped graphical style and the new quantum masks that change how you go through a level, and especially a soundtrack overflowing with catchy tunes. That's just the gravy on top. Not bad from a group of devs who also worked on Skylanders. Make sure you keep them busy so they don't make any more of those. Sequels are intended to inspire confidence. The problem is we get so many of them these days that law of averages results in a handful of rotten sequels that end up being memorable enough to taint the very idea of a second game, and make you forget how confident a sequel should make you feel. In particular, sequels to really amazing video games like Ori and the Blind Forest, which 5 years later, admittedly feels a tad more mundane than before, given the prevalence of Metroidvanias nowadays, but the unique art style and the free-flowing movement was always likely to set it apart from any other game on the market. Well, except for the sequel, which is clearly similar to the first game in many ways, but has received some necessary upgrades to a few problematic areas and is now stronger than ever. And still prettier than a work of classical art. I don't know what kind of talent has to go into a game to make it look this good, but I can kind of understand how all the new additions in Ori and the Will of the Wisp came together. Most of them came to light since they all just increased the flow of movement that was already pretty spectacular in the first game, but now you've got a bunch of different options that you never had before for some extra freedom on the player's behalf, and some creative wiggle room for the developers. Platforming has always been this franchise's forte, but you can feel the refinement going on here, with so many new abilities making so that you're eased into the flow of jumping around the screen if you're new to all of this, but you're given enough practice to eventually take on some hilariously tricky platforming later in the game. When you string a series of jumps together through beautiful environments like this while the soundtrack soars over the top of everything, it feels more and more like a transcending experience than a simple Metroidvania. You're not here for story, or even moment-to-moment gameplay, you're here for those moments where everything clicks together perfectly. And that happens an awful lot. Good lord, was March a weird time to be playing video games. As the world started to crumble into a mad panic to buy as much toilet paper as possible, it suddenly became a lot more appealing to stay at home and play whatever games you've been saving up for a very rainy day. Nintendo didn't know this was coming, and obviously they didn't have any control over the spread of the virus, but things did work out pretty perfectly for the release of Animal Crossing New Horizons. Can't go outside? Hey, that's fine, because here's a new Animal Crossing game where you can make friends of animals and decorate your house and slowly turn an abandoned island into the paradise of your dreams. You can leave the old world behind and do all your socializing at a distance over the internet by visiting your friends' islands and using their lofty turnip prices to make bank. It's the Animal Crossing that you're all used to, just with a few modern twists to help keep things fresh. Like all that fish that you're going to be catching now. From the start, before this game even got announced, I've said that Animal Crossing would be the perfect fit for the Nintendo Switch because the portability of that console goes pretty perfectly with how Animal Crossing is often played in short, consistent bursts, and now you can do it while waiting in line for a coffee, so it's kind of amazing that this game is here right now and how perfect it is. I kind of can't think of a better console-to-game fit. I haven't had too many opportunities to test out Animal Crossing's portability since the world has been on fire for most of the year, but actually sitting down with the Switch, docked, just chilling in the evening, catching fish, it's a beautiful experience, not gonna lie. My only complaint, and it feels strange to mention this in a best games of the year video, but it still needs saying, is that I don't play it all that much these days. Younger me would get a good couple of years out of each Animal Crossing, but these days, I just can't find the time or motivation to keep up with a game that requires me to be there so often to play it. I've been wondering how I should judge New Horizons because of this, since it's a very personal issue that is likely a result of my own circumstances, but maybe if there was more of an end game after paying off your mortgage, I wouldn't feel this way. Still, it's a supremely solid game and the best-selling original Switch game, so evidently it's just me. I don't know, maybe I need some more free time in my life to get back into this one eventually. That museum's not gonna fill itself. Every year I make these videos, I become more and more thankful for indie games. It's like the perfect way of managing expectations, since you'll likely not have any before an indie game comes out, but then, how about that? It's actually an incredible game that is well worth your time and money. We've had some massively successful indie games make the headlines this year, like how Fall Guys dominated the summer, and how Among Us won categories at the Game Awards despite coming out 2 years ago. But even though those games were tons of fun to play this year, I want to talk about Spelunky II instead. We don't always get sequels to indie games, so trust me when I say that getting one to the original Spelunky is a pretty massive deal and an indication of just how much has been updated and improved here. Levels in Spelunky are procedurally generated, which keeps every run feeling unique and giving it a ton of replay value, to the extent that it's not really crying out for a sequel. The fact that we got one anyway is very encouraging. I don't know how we got here, but Derek Yu has made Spelunky 2 feel like a genuinely new experience, which has to be hard considering how complete the original felt. The man's a genius, who was able to wind the clock back on any experience and comfort you felt playing Spelunky, and made it so that your knowledge and strategies for overcoming a screen full of hazards and enemies wasn't worth shit in the sequel. You have to learn enemy behaviour all over again, and while some experience of the game will naturally come in handy, for the most part you're starting again from scratch with Spelunky 2, and I love that so much! You ever have a game that you enjoy so much that you wish you could experience as a novice all over again? Derek Yu managed to make that a reality with this game and has shown the value in making a sequel with time and care. It's not just a second game, it's a new stance on an existing idea that is perfectly suited for newcomers and veterans alike. He's a goddamn wizard. Oh my god, I never thought I'd see the day, but the Final Fantasy VII remake finally came out this year. I suppose 5 years since we first saw that trailer at E3 2015 isn't too crazy, but there's been rumours and news around this game for a long time, and I've had the game on my highly anticipated shortlist for a couple of years, but we're there now. We haven't got anything to worry about until we start getting bored and start anticipating the next episode. It's a bit weird getting excited for a remake, and especially one that changes so much about the source material that it at times feels like a reimagining of Final Fantasy VII, but mercifully, the alterations to the combat and the story are in service of the game that we remember. Evidently so, because Sephiroth got into Smash Bros somehow, and I reckon it's because Sakurai played this game and thought, that's the kind of guy I need in my video game. That man has too much power. As did the Final Fantasy VII Remake, to be fair. This is a game that was anticipated for decades before it was even announced, which comes with some hefty expectations from fans over what kind of game Square are making here. It's a bold reinvention of what Final Fantasy VII is, and it's amazing to me that Square were able to squeeze so much life and new engaging content out of what is merely the first episode of this newly episodic adventure. With updated aesthetics and story beats, suddenly the decision to swap out turn-based combat for more of a free-flowing style of combat makes a lot of sense, and I love that every party member has their own use that helps them feel unique from one another, rather than just a collection of blocky 3D models that get their moves from a series of menus. Can't say I know where Square intend to take this game in later episodes, but I reckon I could get used to playing a new episode of Final Fantasy VII every couple of years, particularly if they fancy remaking other Final Fantasy games once they're eventually done. Let's not get ahead of ourselves though. That comes later. There's always the question, whenever a remake comes out, of how it stacks up compared to the original and if it might be better, and we're unlikely to get a truly confident answer on that until Final Fantasy VII is done pumping out episodes, but for now, it's made such a strong start and made so many improvements, both, quality of life and graphically and actual, story ideas, that we could well be looking at the best version of Final Fantasy VII eventually. Or we can just stop the comparisons entirely and just enjoy the video game that we've got. I no longer have to include a Final Fantasy VII in my most anticipated games video, so I'm really happy. I wish I had a track record as good as Supergiant Games. I've said some weird and highly incorrect stuff in the past that has tainted my record, but the talented people over at Supergiant have made just the 4 video games, and all of them have been pretty damn good. I haven't played Pyre yet, but I've pumped plenty of hours into Bastion and Transistor, and so when I heard they were the minds behind Hades, this roguelike heavily influenced by Greek mythology, that kinda came out of nowhere and became a bit of an overnight classic, I was pleasantly kind of not very surprised. Can't say I was one of the first in the queue to play Hades, despite Supergiant's track record, but roguelikes make my vessel extremely buoyant, and with the kind of style and smooth as silk gameplay that Hades makes look so effortless, I may have found a game to occupy my free time in the same way as The Binding of Isaac did for so long. Let me tell ya, that's some lofty praise right there! Calling it just a roguelike feels like I'm underselling the efforts of Supergiant Games, because it manages to marry together a whole host of genres that almost functions like a more traditional action RPG hacky slashy Diablo style dealie, but since you're not necessarily starting from scratch every time you die, you don't have the same kind of progression as you would in a game like The Binding of Isaac. And that's perfectly fine with me, since it helps to give Hades a different feel to it and allows the story to be drip-fed to the player over numerous playthroughs, as you attempt to escape the underworld and Daddy Hades, something that encourages you to play through multiple times so you can experience the story piece by piece. It's one of the smartest games I've played for a while, and I think over time it could be something that only rises up my own personal rankings. Can't stay in hell forever now, can we? Who here remembers the 20th of March this year? I'm pretty sure this is when the year started to tumble into chaos, but it was also the release date of 2 massive video games, both of which are on this video. Animal Crossing New Horizons had such a chill vibe to it and was the perfect game to play during lockdown, but there was something extra special about Doom Eternal that no amount of cuddly woodland creatures could match. Don't get me wrong, I loved all the fan art that separated both games coming out on the same day, but whereas my love for Animal Crossing eventually fizzled out, Doom Eternal kept kicking long after I was done playing it. Was it the awesome soundtrack? Probably not, because Mick Gordon did half a job and won't be working with id Software again because of it, but it's still full of guitars, and honestly, you're not gonna find those in New Horizons. Not even on Toy Day. The only reason why I'd want to play Doom Eternal is for shooting the shit out of some demons, and by that measure, Eternal is an absolute joy to play. Id tried to have more of a story this time that takes itself a little too seriously despite the nature of the game it's attached to, but you can easily tune it out and return to your scheduled programming of swinging from your grappling hook and pumping bad guys full of bullets. It's actually a similar kind of sequel to Will of the Wisps, where the original was so good at its own style of game that the sequel just had to sprinkle on some new ideas, and Doom Guy definitely can't burrow through sand, but he's got a sword now, and unsurprisingly, that's a fun thing to have in this game. It's not a complicated shooter, despite what the plot may tell you at points, but this is the kind of cathartic experience that I always look forward to playing among a sea of pretentiously artsy AAA video games. Sometimes I don't really want to feel, just want to rip and tear. Ain't it funny how circumstances change based on the advancement of technology? If you told me 5 years ago that one of the best games of 2020 was a VR game, I wouldn't have been surprised simply because I would have assumed that VR was a big part of the market in the future. Nowadays, we know different, since VR isn't a dominant force and most games made for it are nifty little tech demos designed to showcase the technology in a positive light. But I definitely would have been surprised this time last year if you said that VR would come good in 2020 with HalfLife Alyx. Somehow, that's not the biggest surprise with this game, since it's also a new bit of Half-Life for the first time in 13 years, and a glimmer of hope that enough people at Valve still care about these characters and this franchise. I mean, we're probably never going to get the game that everyone wants, but this is good too. It's more than good actually, because HalfLife Alyx has placed itself on a pedestal as the quintessential VR experience, something that everyone needs to play to get the full flavour of VR, and let's be honest, we were missing something like that. On the face of it, this game doesn't do anything groundbreaking with the technology, since it retains the natural tactility of VR that pairs pretty perfectly with Valve's playful game engine for some unique puzzles and solutions to more practical problems, but the appeal here is you now have the perfect excuse to get into VR. It's no longer this hipster hobby that fans of it swear by as an attempt to justify their large financial outlay on some trendy technology. HalfLife Alyx proves that this can be done not only to a full 10 to 12 hour campaign, but with an IP people recognise and in a world rich with atmosphere and lore. You are transported inside the world of Half-Life, and really that's enough to convince me. No idea where we go from here, but I'm just excited that Valve are making video games again. Clearly they got bored of making stupid amounts of money. I didn't really know what my favourite game of 2020 was when I started writing this video. I have a weird writing process where I'll start talking about a game without knowing where it will be ranked within a video, until I'm slowly able to piece together how I feel about a topic and which games go above or below others in my personal rankings. Especially these end of year videos, because it can be quite tricky to compare massive AAA games with smaller indie titles and ascertaining which one was my favourite among all of those. 2020 was a close run affair with no standout title being my runaway favourite, but when I look back on the year as a whole, no game made me feel as good playing it as Ghost of Tsushima. Not what I expected when we were inundated with trailers that seemed to collide with Sekiro aesthetically and didn't do much to help the game stand out all that much, but hey, I put Sekiro top of the tree last year, so clearly I have a type. Ghost of Tsushima will be remembered as the last great PS4 exclusive, put together by the company that brought us Sly Cooper and Infamous, and a game that beat out all other opposition in my eyes because of the overall game we were given to play. There's small problems here and there, like how the open world isn't as filled with activities as a video game should be, but the visual details in Ghost of Tsushima took my breath away on more than one occasion. I got caught up exploring the world a lot, not because I knew there was some quest hiding around here somewhere that would net me a powerful item, but because previous trips had provided me with stunning scenery and beautiful vistas. You sit there and take in the majesty of your surroundings that are perfectly juxtaposed by the brutality of the one-on-one sword duels that become ungodly satisfying if you can pull off that perfect parry and end your foe in an instant. It's not the flashiest game ever made, or even the most emotionally resonant that came out in 2020, but it made me feel things that few games have ever done for me. I'm gonna need this on the PS5 yesterday. Or preferably when I get one myself. This from RabbidLuigi, and my experience of Ghost of Tsushima is perhaps an indication of how personal it is to decide a game of any year, because we're not always looking for the same things from every game that comes out, and we're not always going to agree on what the best game of any year is. For me, I love worlds that I can get lost in and enjoy getting lost in them, with a small sprinkling of some very satisfying combat that makes me feel like a samurai master. Unsurprisingly, there hasn't been too many of those games before.